The morning sun cast long shadows across the military depot as Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison methodically sorted through thousands of spent bullet casings. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, separating different calibers into metal bins that would later be sent for recycling. This mundane task was part of his temporary assignment while recovering from a shoulder injury sustained during his last deployment in Afghanistan. Morrison had served with SEAL Team 6 for over 15 years, participating in countless operations across the Middle East and Africa. His reputation as an exceptional marksman was well known among his peers, but a torn rotator cuff had forced him into desk duty for the past 3 months. The tedious work of inventory management was a far cry from the adrenaline-fueled missions he was accustomed to, yet he approached it with the same dedication he brought to every assignment. As he worked through a particularly large batch of casings from a recent training exercise, something unusual caught his eye. Among the standard brass cases lay a single casing that appeared different from the rest. It was slightly larger, with distinctive markings etched into its surface. Morrison picked it up and examined it closely under the fluorescent lights of the warehouse. The casing bore the unmistakable signs of custom ammunition, far beyond what would typically be used in training exercises. More intriguingly, tiny markings had been carefully engraved along its circumference. As Morrison rotated the casing in his fingers, he realized these weren't random scratches or manufacturing marks. They appeared to be deliberate decorations, almost like notches or symbols. His military training had taught him to pay attention to details that others might overlook. In combat zones, such attention to detail often meant the difference between life and death. Now, holding this peculiar casing, that same instinct told him he had stumbled upon something significant. The craftsmanship of the engravings suggested they weren't made hastily or carelessly. Someone had taken considerable time and effort to create these markings. Morrison set the casing aside and continued his work, but his mind kept returning to it. Throughout his career, he had encountered various military traditions and customs, including the practice of keeping mementos from significant missions or achievements. Some soldiers collected patches, others kept photographs, and a few marked their equipment in personal ways to commemorate important events. As the day progressed, Morrison found himself increasingly curious about the casing's origin. The depot processed ammunition from various military units, including special operations teams, conventional forces, and training academies. Determining which unit had used this particular round would require some investigation, but Morrison's extensive network within the military community might prove helpful. During his lunch break, Morrison photographed the casing from multiple angles, capturing the intricate details of the engravings. The symbols appeared to follow a pattern, though their meaning remained unclear. Some resembled tally marks, while others looked more like decorative elements or possibly coded references to specific locations or dates. The afternoon brought more routine sorting, but Morrison's discovery had reinvigorated his sense of purpose. After months of feeling disconnected from meaningful military work, this small mystery had sparked his investigative instincts. He decided that once his shift ended, he would begin researching the casing's possible origins and significance. As evening approached, Morrison carefully secured the casing in a small evidence bag, treating it with the same care he would give to any piece of potential intelligence. His years of training had taught him that seemingly insignificant details could sometimes reveal much larger stories. This decorated casing might represent nothing more than a soldier's personal keepsake, or it could be connected to something far more significant. The depot grew quiet as the day shift ended, but Morrison remained at his desk, studying the photographs he had taken. Under magnification, the engravings revealed even more complexity than he had initially noticed. The precision of the work suggested it had been done by someone with considerable skill and patience. More importantly, the style of the decorations seemed familiar, though Morrison couldn't immediately place where he might have seen similar markings before. Before leaving for the day, Morrison made a mental note to contact some of his former teammates who might have insight into the casing's origins. His network included snipers, intelligence specialists, and veterans from various elite units who might recognize the significance of such decorations. The military community was smaller than most people realized, especially among special operations personnel, and news of unusual discoveries often traveled quickly through informal channels. As Morrison locked up his workspace and headed home, he carried with him not just the mysterious casing, but also a renewed sense of engagement with his military service. Sometimes the most interesting discoveries came from the most unexpected places, and this small piece of brass might just lead to a story worth telling. Morrison's first call the following morning was to Sergeant Major Bill Rodriguez, a veteran Army sniper he had worked alongside during a joint operation in Iraq 5 years earlier. Rodriguez now served as an instructor at the Army Sniper School and maintained connections throughout the precision shooting community. If anyone could identify unusual ammunition markings, it would be him. "Jake, good to hear from you." Rodriguez's gravelly voice came through the phone. "How's that shoulder holding up?" After exchanging pleasantries, Morrison described his discovery, sending the photographs via secure military email. The line went quiet for several minutes as Rodriguez examined the images. "Holy shit, Jake," Rodriguez finally whispered. "Where exactly did you find this?" The sudden shift in Rodriguez's tone caught Morrison's attention immediately. Gone was the casual friendliness, replaced by something approaching reverence or perhaps concern. Morrison explained the circumstances of his discovery, emphasizing that he had found the casing among routine training ammunition. Rodriguez asked Morrison to hold while he consulted some references. During the wait, Morrison could hear papers shuffling and what sounded like keyboard typing. When Rodriguez returned to the line, his voice carried a weight that Morrison had rarely heard. "Even during their most dangerous missions together, Jake, I need you to be very careful with what I'm about to tell you," Rodriguez began. "Those markings aren't random decorations. They're a scoring system used by an extremely small number of elite snipers to track confirmed long-range eliminations. Each symbol represents a different type of target or engagement distance. What you found there appears to be documentation of some very impressive shooting." Morrison felt his pulse quicken as Rodriguez continued his explanation. The engravings followed a code system that had been developed informally among a handful of the military's most skilled marksmen. Unlike official records, these personal tallies often included details that would never appear in formal after-action reports, including precise distances, environmental conditions, and target classifications. "Based on what I can see in your photos," Rodriguez said, "whoever fired this round was keeping track of eliminations at extreme distances. Some of those markings indicate shots taken at ranges that would challenge even our best snipers. We're talking about engagements at distances where most people couldn't even see the target clearly, let alone hit it consistently." The conversation continued for nearly an hour as Rodriguez walked Morrison through the interpretation of various symbols. Some represented different types of targets. Others indicated successful shots under adverse conditions like high winds or poor visibility. The most intriguing markings appeared to be distance indicators, with the highest suggesting successful eliminations at ranges approaching 3,400 meters. Morrison knew enough about long-range shooting to understand the significance of such distances. At over 2 miles, atmospheric conditions, bullet drop, wind deflection, and countless other factors made accurate shooting extraordinarily difficult. Only a handful of confirmed eliminations at such ranges had ever been officially recorded, and most of those were considered exceptional even among elite military snipers. After ending the call with Rodriguez, Morrison found himself looking at the casing with new understanding. This wasn't just a piece of spent brass. It was potentially a record of some of the most impressive marksmanship achievements in modern military history. The question now was identifying the sniper who had created these markings and determining whether the claimed achievements were accurate. Morrison spent the remainder of the morning researching long-range shooting records and confirmed elimination distances. The official records were classified, but enough information existed in military publications and professional journals to give him a sense of what constituted exceptional performance. The distances indicated by the casing's markings would place its creator among the most skilled marksmen in military history. During lunch, Morrison contacted Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, a Marine Corps intelligence officer who specialized in analyzing enemy sniper activities. Chen had worked extensively in Afghanistan and Iraq, where understanding opposing sniper capabilities was crucial for force protection. Her expertise in ballistics and long-range shooting made her an ideal consultant for Morrison's investigation. Chen's reaction to the photographs was similar to Rodriguez's initial surprise, though she approached the analysis from a different angle. Rather than focusing purely on the technical aspects of the shooting, she considered the operational implications of such capabilities. Jake, if these markings are accurate, whoever fired this round was operating at a level that would have significant strategic impact on the battlefield, she explained. The conversation with Chen raised additional questions about the casing's origin. She pointed out that achieving such long-range accuracy required not just exceptional shooting skills, but also access to specialized equipment, custom ammunition, and detailed intelligence about targets and conditions. This suggested the shooter was part of a well-resourced operation with substantial logistical support. As Morrison absorbed this information, he realized his simple discovery had potentially revealed evidence of extraordinary military achievements that had never been publicly acknowledged. The decorated casing represented not just impressive marksmanship, but possibly historical significance within the special operations community. His investigation was just beginning, but already it was clear that this small piece of brass held secrets worth uncovering. Morrison's investigation took an unexpected turn when he decided to trace the ammunition batch numbers associated with the decorated casing. Using his security clearance and military database access, he spent hours combing through procurement records, training schedules, and unit deployment histories. The process was tedious, but his years of intelligence analysis during special operations had taught him the value of methodical research. The breakthrough came late in the afternoon when Morrison discovered that the batch of ammunition containing his mysterious casing had been originally issued to a classified special operations unit deployed to Afghanistan 18 months earlier. The unit designation was redacted in most records, but cross-referencing shipping manifests and logistics reports revealed tantalizing clues about their mission profile and operational area. Morrison's pulse quickened as he realized the ammunition had been delivered to Forward Operating Base Chapman in Coast Province, a location known for supporting the most sensitive counter-terrorism operations in the region. Chapman served as a staging area for elite units conducting high-value target missions deep in Taliban territory, where extreme-range engagements would be both tactically valuable and operationally necessary. Unable to access classified mission reports directly, Morrison employed a different approach. He contacted Master Chief Kevin Walsh, a SEAL team veteran who now worked in Joint Special Operations planning at the Pentagon. Walsh had spent considerable time coordinating logistics for various classified missions and maintained informal knowledge of which units had operated in specific areas. "Jake, you're asking about some pretty sensitive stuff," Walsh cautioned during their secure phone conversation, "but I can tell you that the time frame and location you're describing coincides with Operation Silent Thunder, one of the most successful counter-sniper campaigns we've ever conducted. The details are still classified, but the results speak for themselves." Walsh explained that Silent Thunder had been designed to neutralize a particularly effective Taliban sniper cell that had been terrorizing coalition forces and Afghan civilians throughout the region. The enemy snipers had been using extreme-range tactics themselves, making traditional counter-sniper approaches ineffective. The mission required deploying equally skilled marksmen capable of engaging at unprecedented distances. The team assigned to Silent Thunder included some of the best long-range shooters from multiple special operations units, Walsh continued. They were specifically selected for their ability to make shots that most people would consider impossible. The mission lasted about 4 months and achieved complete success, but the methods and participants remain highly classified. Morrison pressed for more details, but Walsh had already shared more than he probably should have. However, he did provide one additional piece of information that proved crucial to Morrison's investigation. The lead sniper for Operation Silent Thunder had reportedly established several new records for confirmed eliminations at extreme distances, achievements that would likely never be publicly acknowledged due to operational security requirements. Armed with this new information, Morrison began researching the career histories of elite military snipers who had been deployed to Afghanistan during the relevant time frame. The process required careful attention to publicly available records, unit histories, and professional networks within the special operations community. He was looking for someone whose skills, experience, and operational history would align with the achievements documented on the decorated casing. The search led Morrison to several potential candidates, but one name kept appearing in various contexts. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, a Marine Corps sniper with an exceptional record spanning 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Thompson had received numerous commendations for his marksmanship abilities and had been selected for several joint special operations missions requiring extreme precision shooting. Thompson's official record was impressive enough, but conversations with mutual contacts revealed additional details that weren't documented in formal military files. Fellow Marines described Thompson as possessing almost supernatural shooting abilities, capable of making accurate shots under conditions that would challenge even the most experienced marksman. His reputation within the sniper community bordered on legendary, though he maintained a low profile and rarely discussed his achievements publicly. Morrison learned that Thompson had been medically retired from active duty 6 months earlier due to injuries sustained during his final deployment. He was reportedly living somewhere in rural Montana, maintaining a private lifestyle away from military circles. Tracking down his exact location would require careful investigation, as Thompson had deliberately chosen to remain off most public records. The more Morrison learned about Thompson's background and capabilities, the more convinced he became that the decorated casing might have originated from this exceptional marksman. Thompson's deployment history aligned perfectly with the ammunition batch origins, and his reputation for extreme range shooting matched the achievements documented in the casing's engravings. However, Morrison also recognized the sensitivity of approaching a retired special operations veteran about classified missions and potentially secret achievements. Thompson's desire for privacy needed to be respected, while Morrison's growing curiosity about the casing's significance demanded careful consideration of how to proceed. As Morrison prepared to leave work that evening, he stared once again at the small brass casing that had initiated this complex investigation. What had begun as routine inventory work had evolved into a quest to understand one of the most remarkable examples of military marksmanship in modern history. The challenge now was determining whether Marcus Thompson would be willing to share the story behind these carefully crafted decorations. Finding Marcus Thompson proved more challenging than Morrison had anticipated. The retired Marine had effectively disappeared from conventional databases, leaving only scattered traces of his existence in rural Montana. Morrison spent several days working through various contacts and resources, eventually locating Thompson through a network of veterans who maintained informal communication channels outside official military systems. The initial contact came through a mutual acquaintance, Gunnery Sergeant Pete Hoffman, who had served with Thompson during his second Afghanistan deployment. Hoffman had maintained a friendship with Thompson after retirement and was willing to serve as an intermediary, though he warned Morrison that Thompson was extremely private about his military service and might not be receptive to discussing classified operations. "Marcus doesn't talk about the war much," Hoffman explained during their phone conversation. "He's dealing with some stuff from his last deployment, and he's chosen to live pretty isolated up there in the mountains. But he's a good man, and if you explain why this is important to you, he might be willing to listen." Hoffman agreed to reach out to Thompson and explain Morrison's discovery and investigation. The process required patience, as Thompson apparently had limited communication methods at his remote location and preferred to maintain minimal contact with anyone connected to his military past. Morrison provided Hoffman with carefully edited details about the decorated casing, emphasizing his respect for operational security and his genuine interest in understanding the significance of what he had found. 3 days later, Hoffman called back with Thompson's response. The retired sniper was initially skeptical and concerned about discussing anything related to his deployments, but the specific details about the casing and its engravings had apparently convinced him that Morrison's investigation was legitimate. Thompson had agreed to meet, but only under strict conditions that would protect his privacy and maintain security protocols. The meeting was arranged for the following weekend at a small diner in Missoula, Montana. Morrison would fly out on his own time and expense, presenting himself as a military researcher interested in historical documentation rather than an investigator pursuing classified information. Thompson had specified that the conversation would be informal and that nothing discussed could be recorded or formally documented without his explicit permission. Morrison arrived in Missoula on Saturday morning, renting a car for the drive to the designated meeting location. The diner was a typical rural establishment, busy with locals but offering sufficient privacy for a quiet conversation. Morrison arrived early and selected a corner booth where they could talk without being overheard by other customers. Thompson appeared exactly on time, and Morrison immediately recognized the bearing and alertness that characterized experienced special operations veterans. Despite his casual clothing and attempts to blend in with the local clientele, Thompson moved with the controlled awareness of someone accustomed to dangerous environments. He was younger than Morrison had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the lean build and steady eyes typical of elite marksmen. The initial conversation was cautious, with both men carefully assessing each other's motivations and credibility. Thompson asked detailed questions about Morrison's military background, deployment history, and current assignment. He seemed particularly interested in understanding why a Navy SEAL would go to such lengths to investigate a single spent casing discovered during routine inventory work. Morrison explained his growing fascination with the decorated casing and his respect for the level of skill it appeared to represent. He shared the analysis provided by Rodriguez and Chen, emphasizing that his interest was driven by professional admiration rather than idle curiosity or any desire to compromise operational security. The conversation gradually became more relaxed as Thompson apparently concluded that Morrison's motivations were genuine. "You want to know about that casing," Thompson said quietly. "You need to understand what we were dealing with over there. The Taliban had some snipers who were making our lives hell, taking shots from distances that most people thought were impossible. They were killing our guys and innocent civilians, and conventional tactics weren't working." Thompson explained that Operation Silent Thunder had been conceived as a response to this specific threat. The mission required marksmen capable of engaging targets at ranges that pushed the absolute limits of current technology and human skill. Success would require not just exceptional shooting abilities, but also perfect intelligence, ideal equipment, and favorable conditions that might occur only rarely during months of patient waiting. "The team was small," Thompson continued. "Maybe 6 shooters total, all volunteers from different units who had proven they could make shots that others couldn't. We spent months in preparation, studying the terrain, analyzing weather patterns, and developing custom ammunition loads that would give us every possible advantage." As Thompson spoke, Morrison began to understand the extraordinary nature of the mission and the level of dedication required from its participants. The decorated casing represented not just impressive marksmanship, but months of meticulous preparation and the courage to attempt shots that had never been successfully completed by military snipers. The story behind those small engravings was far more complex and significant than Morrison had initially imagined. Thompson leaned back in the diner booth, his eyes taking on a distant quality as he recalled the specifics of Operation Silent Thunder. Morrison sensed that the retired Marine was deciding how much of the story he was willing to share, weighing operational security concerns against what seemed to be a genuine desire to have someone understand the significance of what his team had accomplished. "The mission brief was unlike anything I'd ever received," Thompson began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Intelligence had identified 3 Taliban snipers who were operating from positions that traditional counter-sniper tactics couldn't touch. They were taking shots from over 2 miles away, using terrain and weather conditions that made them nearly impossible to locate, let alone engage effectively." Thompson explained that the enemy snipers had killed 17 coalition soldiers and countless Afghan civilians over a 6-month period. Their tactics were sophisticated, involving multiple prepared positions, detailed surveillance of coalition movements, and shooting skills that rivaled the best military marksmen. Conventional responses had failed because the distances involved exceeded the effective range of most military rifle systems and the capabilities of average snipers. "We set up our first observation post in September," Thompson continued. "The position offered a clear view of the valley where the enemy snipers had been most active, but it also meant we were exposed to the same extreme shooting distances they were using. For 3 weeks we watched and waited, mapping their movement patterns and identifying their preferred firing positions." Morrison listened intently as Thompson described the painstaking process of preparation and patience required for extreme-range sniper operations. The team had established multiple observation and firing positions, rotated personnel to maintain alertness during extended surveillance periods, and coordinated with intelligence units to predict when and where the enemy snipers might appear. The first engagement opportunity came in early October, when intelligence indicated that one of the Taliban snipers was planning to attack a coalition convoy, traveling through a vulnerable section of the valley. Thompson's team had positioned themselves on a ridgeline that offered a clear line of sight to the sniper's most likely firing position, but the distance was measured at 2,847 meters, well beyond the range at which most military snipers had ever attempted a shot. The conditions were perfect, Thompson recalled. Light wind, clear visibility, and we had positive identification of the target. I had maybe 30 seconds before he would be in position to fire on our convoy. Everything we'd trained for came down to that one moment. Thompson described the shot in technical terms that Morrison could appreciate as a fellow marksman. The bullet had required nearly 4 seconds of flight time, during which atmospheric conditions, wind deflection, and bullet drop had to be calculated with mathematical precision. The target was barely visible even through high-power optics, appearing as little more than a shadow against the rocky terrain. The bullet struck center mass, Thompson said simply. Target eliminated at 2,847 meters. It was the longest confirmed kill shot I'd made up to that point. But it wouldn't be my last during that deployment. Morrison realized that Thompson was describing the achievement documented by one of the markings on the decorated casing. The precision and distance represented a level of marksmanship that few people could comprehend, achieved under combat conditions, where failure would have meant the death of coalition soldiers. The conversation continued for another hour, as Thompson described additional engagements during Operation Silent Thunder. Each successful elimination had required similar levels of patience, precision, and technical expertise. The team had ultimately neutralized all 3 enemy snipers, but the final engagement had pushed the limits of what was considered possible in military marksmanship. The last shot was the one that really mattered, Thompson said, his voice dropping even lower. The target was at 3,427 meters, using a position that overlooked a school where Afghan children were attending classes. He'd already killed 2 teachers and was preparing to fire into a classroom full of kids when we finally had a clear shot. Morrison felt his breath catch as Thompson described the conditions surrounding this ultimate test of his abilities. The distance exceeded any previously recorded military sniper kill. The environmental conditions were marginal, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. The shot would require not just perfect technical execution, but also the emotional control to perform under the most extreme pressure imaginable. I took that shot knowing it might be impossible, Thompson concluded, but I also knew that if I didn't try, children were going to die. The bullet took 6.5 seconds to reach the target, 6.5 seconds of wondering if I'd calculated everything correctly, if the wind would hold steady, if the bullet would perform as expected at that distance. Thompson's expression showed both pride and the weight of what he had accomplished. The 3,427-meter elimination had saved the lives of dozens of children and established a new record for confirmed military sniper kills, but it had also marked the end of Thompson's combat career, due to the psychological toll of operating at such extreme levels of responsibility and precision. The weight of Thompson's final shot had stayed with him long after Operation Silent Thunder concluded. Morrison could see the psychological toll etched in the retired Marine's face as he continued his account, describing how the responsibility of making life-and-death decisions at impossible distances had gradually worn down his mental resilience. After that 3,427-meter shot, everything changed, Thompson explained, absently turning his coffee cup in circles on the diner table. Command wanted to know how I'd done it, whether it could be replicated if we could train other snipers to achieve similar results. But they didn't understand that some shots can't be reduced to technical procedures or training protocols. Thompson described the aftermath of his record-breaking elimination when military analysts and training specialists had descended upon his unit, seeking to understand and systematize his extraordinary capabilities. They had measured every aspect of his equipment, analyzed his ammunition loads, documented his shooting techniques, and attempted to create training programs based on his methods. They treated me like a laboratory specimen, Thompson said with visible frustration. Every shot I'd made during Silent Thunder was dissected and analyzed, as if extreme range marksmanship was just a matter of following the right procedures. They couldn't understand that what I'd accomplished required more than technical knowledge or perfect equipment. Morrison recognized the institutional tendency to reduce individual excellence to systematic processes, something he had witnessed throughout his own military career. The military's desire to replicate exceptional performance often overlooked the intangible factors that made such achievements possible, including intuition, experience, and the psychological fortitude required to perform under extreme pressure. Thompson explained that the decorated casing Morrison had discovered represented his private method of documenting achievements that would never be officially recognized due to classification requirements. Each engraving had been carefully added after successful eliminations, creating a personal record that captured not just distances and targets, but also the emotional significance of each engagement. I started marking casings after my first long-range elimination in Iraq, Thompson revealed. It wasn't about keeping score or bragging rights. It was about remembering why each shot mattered, honoring the responsibility that came with that level of capability. Every mark represented lives saved or threats eliminated. The conversation shifted to Thompson's decision to retire from active duty following his final deployment. The physical injuries that had ended his military career were significant, but Morrison sensed that the psychological impact of operating at such extreme levels of responsibility had been equally influential in Thompson's choice to leave the service. The medical discharge was almost a relief, Thompson admitted. I had reached a point where I wasn't sure I could handle another deployment, another situation where children's lives depended on my ability to make an impossible shot. The pressure was starting to affect my judgment, and in my line of work, that's when people die. Thompson described his transition to civilian life in rural Montana, where the isolation and natural environment provided the peace he needed to process his military experiences. He had deliberately chosen to minimize contact with his former military colleagues, not out of shame or regret, but because he needed distance from the intensity of his special operations career. Living up here, I can practice my shooting skills without anyone depending on the results, Thompson explained. I can miss a target without worrying that my failure will cost someone their life. It's taken me months to remember what shooting for enjoyment feels like instead of shooting because lives are at stake. Morrison understood the complexity of Thompson's situation and the courage required to step away from a military career at the peak of his abilities. The retired Marine had achieved something that might never be equaled in military marksmanship. But the psychological cost of such excellence had ultimately made continued service unsustainable. As their conversation neared its end, Thompson reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small cloth pouch containing several additional decorated casings. These are the others from Silent Thunder, he said quietly. Each one represents a successful elimination and the specific circumstances surrounding it. The one you found was probably lost during equipment cleaning after we returned from deployment. Morrison examined the additional casings, noting the similarities in engraving style and the progression of markings that documented Thompson's increasingly impressive achievements. The collection represented a complete record of Operation Silent Thunder's success, as well as a testament to the extraordinary capabilities of one of the military's most skilled marksmen. I'm trusting you with this information because I can see you understand what it means, Thompson concluded. These achievements will never be publicly recognized, and that's probably for the best. But someone should know that when the impossible needed to be done, there were people willing to attempt it. The drive back to Missoula Airport gave Morrison time to process everything Thompson had shared during their extraordinary meeting. The retired Marine had entrusted him with knowledge of achievements that represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship, accomplishments that would likely remain classified for decades while their psychological toll continued to affect the man who had made them possible. Morrison reflected on the contrast between Thompson's public obscurity and the historical significance of his achievements. The 3,427-meter elimination that had saved children's lives represented a new benchmark in military marksmanship. Yet Thompson lived in deliberate isolation, seeking peace from the responsibilities that had once defined his identity. The decorated casings were the only tangible evidence of achievements that had helped turn the tide in one of the most challenging counter-sniper operations in modern military history. During his flight back to base, Morrison considered his own relationship with military service and the nature of exceptional performance under extreme pressure. His career as a SEAL had involved numerous high-stakes operations, but nothing approaching the level of individual responsibility that Thompson had carried as an extreme-range marksman. The psychological burden of knowing that dozens of lives could depend on a single shot, fired across impossible distances, was beyond most people's comprehension. Upon returning to his duties at the ammunition depot, Morrison approached his work with renewed perspective. The routine task of sorting spent casings now carried deeper meaning, as each piece of brass potentially represented someone's story of service, sacrifice, or achievement. The discovery that had initiated his investigation reminded him that extraordinary stories often remained hidden within the mundane details of military logistics and administration. Morrison decided to document Thompson's story in a classified report that would preserve the historical record without compromising operational security or violating the retired Marine's trust. He worked carefully to present the achievements of Operation Silent Thunder in terms that honored the participants while protecting their identities and maintaining classification requirements for sensitive tactical information. The report found its way to senior leadership within the special operations community, where Thompson's achievements were quietly acknowledged and his methods studied for potential application in future operations. The 3,427-meter elimination was officially recorded as the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history, though this recognition remained within classified channels that would never reach public attention. Several months later, Morrison received word that Thompson had agreed to serve as an unofficial consultant for extreme-range marksmanship training, working with a small group of elite military snipers to share his knowledge and techniques. The arrangement allowed Thompson to contribute his expertise while maintaining the privacy and distance he needed for his psychological well-being. The decorated casing that had started Morrison's investigation was eventually returned to Thompson, along with the others from his collection. Morrison felt that these personal mementos belonged with their creator, serving as private reminders of achievements that had saved lives and advanced the capabilities of military marksmanship. Thompson had seemed genuinely grateful to recover the lost casing, treating it with the reverence of someone reconnecting with an important piece of his personal history. Morrison's own recovery from his shoulder injury progressed well, and he eventually returned to active duty with his SEAL team. The investigation into Thompson's story had provided him with a new appreciation for the diverse ways that military personnel contribute to mission success, sometimes through achievements that remain forever hidden from public recognition. The experience also reinforced Morrison's understanding that the most significant military accomplishments often involved individuals who pushed beyond conventional limits to achieve results that others considered impossible. Thompson's willingness to attempt shots at distances where failure seemed likely demonstrated the kind of courage and dedication that defined the special operations community at its best. Years later, Morrison would occasionally think about Thompson living quietly in the Montana mountains, practicing his marksmanship skills without the weight of life-and-death consequences. The retired Marine had found peace after achieving something that might never be equaled, choosing personal healing over continued military glory. The small depot where Morrison had made his discovery continued processing thousands of spent casings each month, most of them representing routine training exercises or conventional operations. But Morrison never forgot that among those ordinary pieces of brass, extraordinary stories sometimes waited to be discovered by someone with the curiosity and persistence to investigate their significance. Thompson's decorated casings remained a reminder that military excellence often came at personal cost, and that the most impressive achievements in warfare were frequently accomplished by individuals who understood that some responsibilities were worth bearing regardless of their psychological toll. The story of Operation Silent Thunder would remain classified, but its impact on military marksmanship and the life of one exceptional Marine would endure long after the official records were sealed away in classified archives.